Hello, everybody. Welcome this afternoon. Today, if some of you want to share, that would be great, so that I can give you feedback on your postcard assignment as you're working on it. If not, what I have in mind today is I'm going to give you a very short talk on typography. And it's a handout that I have that's available. Let me check something here. It's a handout that I have available on my website. It's sort of an introduction to typography. And I mean, it's no replacement for taking a class in type. But that's what we're dealing with today. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring my website down here like so. So I presume, can everybody see this? I hope. Anybody? Hello? Let's see here. Yep, you can see it. Good. Okay. Just sometimes when you share screens, and I've got a bunch of screens going here, that sometimes the right one isn't projected. So I wanted to make sure of that. So for all of you, either on This Week in Class or the handouts page under ancillary lectures, if you go to the typography primer, it opens up a little slideshow. So that's what I'm showing now. It's the basics of typography. And that's what I want to cover today. Okay, so that will be it, unless any of you want to share. So anyway, the typeface that I've used here just is the title for my slideshow, my presentation, and what I'm using here is really harkens back to the first typeface that we used or adopted in Western civilization, which is Roman. And this was actually the type, the type that was lifted from Trajan's column in Rome. It had a unique proportioning system. There were no small letters, lowercase, whatever you want to call them. It was just this. They were really beautifully designed, elegant, because they were developed by chiseling in stone. You can see the little serifs that were developed by that technique. But anyway, that's, it's really beautiful, elegant, and that really harkens back to the earliest typeface that we use in Western civilization. But over the years, we have developed technically 5 different categories of type. There is the serif, sans serif, script, black letter, and decorative. So serif is what you saw a moment ago, and it's these serifs are these little, I call them little feet or appendages that stick out from some of the letter forms, and they were widely adopted in the design of many modern typefaces. Okay, and they adhered to that original proportioning system. Over the years, though, you will find that they actually serve a function, and that they enhance or lend to the readability of a typeface. And so you'll find, more often than not, in the printed word, in magazines and newspapers, that sort of thing, that for the block of text or the copy that's used is that they will use a serif typeface. Now, for those of you interested in designing websites, that's not always the case. because for some reason on the screen, these little serifs kind of break up or don't necessarily read that well. So what occurred much later in the 20th century is modern technology developed. They were able to eliminate the serifs, and they were able to change the proportioning system, which lend itself to this sans serif approach. And sans serif just means without serifs in the French. But by being able to eliminate the serifs and to change the proportioning system, they were able to create a really wide range of fonts from a particular typeface or family of type. So what you'll find later on is that they could easily adapt and create serif typefaces. They were able to create condensed or expanded. They were able to create a variety of weights from very light to heavy typefaces, which you generally don't find in serif typefaces. They each have their function, but serif and sans serif basic approach, they're the most widely used, not only for headlines, subheads, but for body copy. So that's what you'll find in most cases. Now, the others, script, taken from pen, from handwritten letter forms, but it's all formalized, and there are a lot of different typefaces and fonts that exist based on script. It's not used that widely, except for special invitations, like for wedding announcements, birth of a child, things like that. It too, in this day and age, is difficult to read. So if it is used in print or it's used on the web, it's usually reserved for headlines or subheads, something with just a few words, and that is significant in size. And then there's the black letter, and that this was developed in the Middle Ages. It was the monks who were hand scribing, for example, manuscripts. And it was at that time that by using a broad pen, that they developed the lowercase letters. Still, by today's standards, it's rarely used. Again, it's used more as a decorative typeface, just like script is. But again, it has its function, and it can be used in a variety of situations to convey a particular feeling or mood, or in a document that you're designing. In addition to that, the last one, and probably the biggest category, are the decorative typefaces. And that's everything else. Anything that looks like little BBs or pinballs or any animals or whatever, then that falls under the category of decorative. But technically, in this day and age, script, black letter also follow under that category of decorative, because you really should reserve them, as I said just a moment ago, that they should be used for headlines, subheads, but not a large block of text. So technically we have 5 categories, but really there are only 3. So how is those categories broken down? They're broken down into 3 additional subcategories. There is a type family, okay, then a particular typeface, and then an individual font. So the family of type is it serif, sans serif, or decorative, okay? Then within that individual family, there are individual typefaces. So Helvetica would be one of those typefaces, okay? So they've anthropomorphized type, and they've broken it down so that it kind of reflects, you know, we as human beings, something very similar, that we have the family, and then within the family, there are individual faces, but those individual faces have certain similar characteristics with one another. And that's what you see here in Helvetica. Okay, Helvetica is in the family of sans serif, but the face Helvetica has a myriad of fonts available, and I didn't even include all of these that are available. But you can see it ranges from condensed to light to italic to bold italic and everything in between, regular. Now, each of these are considered individual fonts. So what is a font? A font exists within a typeface, and the typeface exists within the category of family. Now, what is a font? It is what you see below here, is that a type designer has taken, for example, here in Helvetica regular, they have designed all of the caps, lowercase, numerals, and special characters that exist within that particular font. And while they may look very similar to the italic or the light or the condensed black, each individual letter form is designed with that weight in mind. And there may be very subtle changes. There may be some very significant changes that they have made. So when you see the word font, that's exactly what that means, okay? So some typefaces will have several fonts that exist underneath. Some may only have one. They may be very decorative, and there will be, they will exist under the family of decorative, and maybe just one weight will be available, and it can't be italicized, it can't be made bold, it can't be, you know, there's nothing else that's available for it. And yet something like Helvetica, that there are, as I said, a myriad of fonts available within that typeface. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about are the very parts of a letter form, or letters. Okay, so I've used the word body. And as you noticed the other day in my lecture, that the letters rested on top of a line here. And this is called the baseline. And remember, we have tools that allow you to move the type up or below the baseline if it is so desired or that you need to do that. Okay. Now, what you may also notice is that typically the horizontals in letter forms rest directly on that baseline, but curved letters actually sit just a little bit below, so that you notice that the O rests a little bit below the baseline, as does part of the D here. And the reason being is that optically, when you look at it, it looks like each of these, the O and the D, rest directly on that baseline. If we moved each of these letters up a little bit, it would look like they were kind of floating just a little bit and not sitting on that baseline. So it's an optical kind of thing. Now, there is the baseline, and there's also something called the waistline. So depending on how a font is designed, or a family of type, or a particular typeface, I should say typeface, not family, but typeface or font, that all of the lowercase letters, the highest part that they exist in the middle range here is at the waistline. And then you'll notice that there are parts of lowercase letters that rise above the waistline and below the baseline. So each of those, anything that rises above the waistline is called the ascender, and anything that exists below the baseline is called a descender. Okay. Now the distance from the baseline to the waistline is called X height. And that really isn't talked about that much these days. But you'll notice that when we look at the actual height of the letter or a particular font, that we have also from the baseline to the top of the cap, we have cap height, but it's not that distance that we use to measure type, okay? It actually goes from the bottom of the descender to the top of the ascender. And you can see in this particular instance, I use Times Roman for this. The top of the ascender actually extends a little bit above the cap height. So that affects your overall type size. That you might think that you're using a really large typeface, but in fact, when it may look smaller than you think because you have this distance here and here that you're taking into consideration, you need to take into consideration. And if you're using all caps, then there wouldn't be any of the letter forms that exist below the baseline. And it may be that since you're not, in this particular case, there are no ascenders, that it would appear a little bit smaller as well. So those are all the different, well, there are many more parts to describe type, but I'm just covering the basics right now. And something about type height, and this is what I just mentioned to you, is that it's measured from the bottom of the descender to the top of the ascender. That's how it's measured. So if we go to the next part, nomenclature that's used in measuring type. So you may have noticed that when you're measuring type, that it's in points. Well, points are just simply a unit of measurement. Okay, so to be able to translate from points to inches, we do the following. So type is measured in points and picas. That's the unit of measurement that type is measured. And I would not, you could in Photoshop or Illustrator or other programs change that unit of measurement, but I wouldn't. It's just a standard. It's been in existence for hundreds of years. So I would just leave it alone. And when computer programs were developed and they allow you to use type, they adopted the same measurement, units of measurement. And that's what's used, continues to be used today. So to let you know, there are 12 points in a pica, and there are 6 picas in an inch. So if you do the math, 6 times 12, there are 72 points in 1 inch. So when you're measuring 12-point type, or 11-point, or 10, or all the way down to 6, or even 4-point, 1 point isn't much. It's 1/72nd of an inch, but it is visually noticeable. Okay, you do see that difference, and type hounds can be very persnickety about whether they choose to use 6 or 7-point type. It can, for them, they can, have, I won't say huge arguments over it, but they can be fairly vocal about something as small as that will make a difference to them. And to repeat, just to let you know, type size equals the distance from the top of the ascender to the bottom of the descender. So again, that's how type is measured. So if you're wondering what, if you want to translate for yourself and you're wondering what 12-point type or 72-point type is, it's close to an inch. But remember, the measurement is made from the top of the ascender to the bottom of the descender. Other terminology that we talked about the other day when I was using the type tool. Caps are also referred to, capital letters are also referred to as uppercase. Small letters are also referred to as lowercase. And that terminology came from back in the day, let's say 18th century is an example that when, if you think of Benjamin Franklin, who had a print shop and they set type by hand in those days, that the capital letters were in cases that were above, so those were the uppercase, and the small letters were found in cases below, so those were the lowercase. So that's how that terminology came to be. And then we also talked the other day about how you could selectively adjust the space between individual letter forms and words. Well, that term is called kerning. And then we also talked about the tracking tool that allows you to uniformly adjust the space between letters and words. Kind of like an accordion, where you could take an entire line of type or an entire word and stretch it out as wide as you want, or make it as condensed as much as you want. And then the other term, the last term that we talked about, is the spacing between lines of type. And that is called leading. And that term also came from back in the day. We can go back to Benjamin Franklin when he had his print shop, is that if they wanted to increase the space between lines of type, they actually put little slivers of lead between them. And again, those that terminology continues today. It has not changed, and I don't anticipate that it will change. It has changed, though, in web design. They don't use all the same terminology anymore. But for us in print, that's what we're using. Then one of the last pages that we have here, and this is technically incorrect, but think of this as an ad. So this is not a headline. This would be a masthead. But if it were an ad, it would be called a headline. And in a newspaper, this would not be called a subhead, but it would be, each of these would be called headlines. And then the smallest text that you see here is the copy. So typically in succession of order, headlines are the largest or the masthead. That's, you know, they don't have to follow this format, but as a default, it's not a bad practice to follow. And then subheads are a little bit smaller, and then the body copy or the copy is smaller yet. And that would also apply to the images that you use. You know, if you're designing, in this case, a tabloid size magazine or a newspaper, the most important elements go to the top and they're the largest, and the less important elements are smaller and go to the bottom. And that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much how the layout of how things work. So you have your headlines or mastheads, subheads, and copy. Now, what sizes do you use for each of those? Copy, which is the smallest, ranges anywhere typically from on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, or in a newspaper, it could be tabloid size or larger, ranges from 8 to 13 point. Okay, and column widths range from 13.5 picas to 48 picas. Now, the reason for each of these is that in most cases, if you were to look at the New York Times or Los Angeles Times, they might use 8 or 9 point type. And then they have several columns, maybe an 8-column format. And each of those columns would be probably around 13.5 picas wide. If they wanted it to be double, triple, or quadruple, then it would go all the way up to maybe 48 picas. And even if you were to look at your textbook, it's probably not any wider than 48 picas, any block of text. And the reason for that is, just as for the 13.5 for the smaller ones, the smaller columns, is that if you extend the type any longer than 48 picas, it's difficult for the reader when they reach the end of a line for their eye to trace all the way back to the start of the next line. So 48 picas seems to be a pretty good distance. And similarly, if it's if the column is too small, then it's too hard to go from, you know, difficult to read from one line to the next. And they've just found over the years that these sizes are pretty, work pretty well. Now subheads, and again, this ranges from an 8.5 by 11 to tabloid size document. Subheads generally range from 14 to 18 point, but again, they're not fixed. They can change. They can be as small as 13.5 or 13 points. They can be larger. You can really change them up quite a bit. And then the last one, headlines, they generally for 8.5 by 11 document. That's vertical or horizontal, to a tabloid size, which is 11 by 17. Headlines can range from 24 point, and they can go up to as big as you feel you need them to be. They can be several inches high, especially when you're designing something like a poster. Then the size ranges can be tremendously different. So that's in probably how much? Yeah, 30 minutes here. That's type in a nutshell. Just all the terminology, so that when you're when you're using the tools in Illustrator or Photoshop or that sort of thing, you'll understand the nomenclature, you'll understand the basic sizes, you'll understand, you know, all the way back to the beginning here. We were talking about the basic categories and families and the individual faces and fonts that you'll be using, so that it has, you know, some meaning for you a little bit. And where you'll really get to know type is if you do happen to take a class with us or someplace else in typography, where you'll get to know typography a little bit more intimately and realize that each of the individual families and faces and fonts, they have, you know, unique characteristics and can convey a very different mood, feeling in a particular design that you're working on. Okay. Do you have any questions for me today as I finish this up? No? Let me go ahead and I'm going to pause to resume the recording. So the postcard assignment I would probably like to be due by the end of next week. And next week I will work on lesson 8. And again, they'll probably go pretty quickly from here on out. We really kind of stepped up the pace the first 6 weeks of class to get all of these lessons under your belt, so you feel somewhat comfortable with Photoshop. And we can cover some of the more nuanced aspects of it later on. And that's what I hope to do. But it would be helpful if I had questions from you like I had the other day. You know, how do you make something look like it's underwater? Or, you know, if there's any questions like that that you have, I enjoy the challenge of trying to figure it out and work it out for you. Okie doke. No? No questions. Okay. Okay, Cynthia, I can have you share. So Cynthia, hold on. Do you mind if it's recorded? Or do you want me to stop the recording? It's okay. Okay, so I'm gonna elevate you to Cynthia. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna elevate you, promote you to panelist, and I'm gonna allow you to talk. So let's look over here under panelists. And go ahead and unmute yourself. And then you're welcome to talk, or if it might not be that you can. So hold on here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So go ahead, and I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can share.
Okay.
So let's see what you got.
Okay. I'm trying to see how I can share my desktop.
It should be, well, let me share mine again so you can see here. So you should see this little bar at the bottom of your screen, and it says new share. That's what you'll want to click on, and then it will ask you if you only, I have lots of different screens, so it asks me which one I want to share. But if it's only one, then that will be it. It will be the one that we have. So I'm going to stop sharing mine, and then you can share yours.
Oh, okay. It says that the host disabled attendee from sharing slides.
So I need to go back in here, and my mistake. There we go. So that is changed now.
Okay.
You should be able to share. There you go. Okay.
So kind of some of the issues that I'm running into is that I have, well, this is one of my photos, and I have a filter on it. And so it has kind of like a texture, grainy, like feel to it. So when I'm adding new pictures onto it, it doesn't seem like seamless. And then also the Photoshop, I try to Photoshop my dog and myself inside the car, but I'm having trouble kind of making it seem seamless.
Okay. So part of it is, let's look at the light source. And there is a way that you can control that. Because the light source for the car is directly straight overhead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we look at, we have here, it's really hard to tell. I would try to, I think it's going to be from the right side here because I'm looking at the rocks over to the left.
Mm-hmm.
So the light source would be to the right. So if you were to go into Photoshop, you are in Photoshop,
Mm-hmm.
and go up to the top. So go up to the top.
Okay.
Let's see. I can't see the menu bar here. Okay, go under, you have zoom selected. So click on the thing, click on your document. Okay, why is zoom still selected at the top of your, oh, that's mine. There we go. So, I'm viewing your option. At the top, here, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and, because, well, what you can do to be able to see through the back is you're going to delete the back window so that you can see through it.
Oh, okay, I see.
Okay, so that's what you're gonna do. And, or you're going to create a selection of it. This might be a better choice to make a selection of that, put it on its own layer, and which would be Command J, or not just, yeah, Command J, but make sure that it's deleted from this particular layer. Mm-hmm. And then you can change the opacity so you can see through it.
Oh, okay.
That right there will make a big difference.
Okay.
Then what you can do is, I'm trying to think here where it's located. Go ahead and stop sharing for a minute so I can show you what we can do. And I'll share my screen again. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I have a question here. Giovanni. Yeah, wait a minute. The question by Giovanni is the lesson you did on Hawaii, the Hawaii assignment, on layers. It's sort of like that, yeah. That could be a good example of a postcard, sure. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna share again. And I'm just gonna use the same thing. And this is what you might try on that particular layer. So let me move this up. So for example, if I wanted to adjust the lighting on a particular layer, so let's look at our layer over here, and let me move this thing up so you can see. So I'm working on the right side here. Okay, you see what I'm doing?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to affect the lighting on her and nothing else. So I'm going to turn off the background for a minute. And I still have this shadow because they combine the two. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to filter, and I'm going to come down to render, and then I'm going to go to lighting effects. And it might take a minute for this to pop up. I've got other things rendering in the background, so my computer is kind of slow at the moment. So we can see over here, see how the lighting has changed?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, and this is something that you might want to play with. Notice that everything in here is in silhouette. Now, right now I have what is called a spotlight, but what you can do is you can come in here, you can use a point light or an infinite light. So let's try an infinite light. And now we can come up here and we can control the direction of that light. So I'm going to move the direction of that light over a little bit. So I need to, come on. I can change the intensity, change the color, and that sort of thing. So let's click here. Come on, come on, come on. Why aren't you working for hearing? It's an infinite light, but I want to change its direction. So how can I do this? I just want it to affect that particular layer and nothing else. So I have the infinite light. I haven't used this in a while. So I should be able to change the direction of this. So let's come back in here. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. It's done from here. See how I can move this over from the right side? So my light source is coming from here.
Yes, I do see that.
Yeah. So that would be a possibility. And then we can go ahead. Let me bring this a little bit closer like so. And then I can change the intensity of the light, make it brighter. I can make it less. So you can try to match your background image.
Okay.
That's what I would try. And notice how you can affect that. Now, I would try infinite and spotlight. And again, you can affect this by changing the outer diameter, and we can, move it, and we can also change the intensity or the from here.
Okay.
And see how it's affecting just part of her face and not the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to create, if the light is coming from the right side, that the right side of the car will be a little bit lighter and the left side will be a little bit darker. Give that a try.
Okay.
And try infinite light, try spotlight, try them all until the bottom line is, until you get the effect that you're going for, that would be worthwhile.
Okay.
And again, you're going to control, the outer distance of this, and that will control how much of the car is being affected. You can always move it around. If you just wanted just a little bit, if I just wanted to highlight her hair, and I wanted the rest in shadow. And you see this all the time in movie posters and stuff where, people's faces are extremely, in extreme shadow, except for just part of their faces. And that's, how that works.
Okay.
So that's what I would try there. So two things that you're going to do. You're going to take the back window, and you're going to make a selection of it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to cut it and you're going to paste it in place on a separate layer. And then with it on a separate layer, adjust the opacity. Maybe start it at maybe 50% so you can see through and you'll be able to see the woods behind it.
Okay.
And maybe it needs to be lighter, maybe it needs to be a little bit darker, I don't know.
Okay.
But you don't want to eliminate it altogether. And then the second thing is if you really want to affect the shadow of the car or the lighting of the car, I think you can get away with the shadow underneath being directly underneath it. If not, you might have to eliminate it, and then you'll have to work with the shadow the way that we worked with her shadow here in lesson 6.
Okay.
So that it's off to the side a little bit. And then the lighting of the car, play with that a little bit. It will take some experimentation. That's all I can say.
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Okay. Anybody else? Does anybody else have any questions, comments? Let me stop sharing for a moment and let's come back. No? So let me share the screen again. And actually, I'm going to cancel the light that I applied to that. So it just goes back to where I was before. There we go. Oh, something to remember, all of you, is that when you apply a lighting effect, it is permanent, it is destructive. So make sure that you are working on a layer copy, not on your original layer, in case you need to go back and then make adjustments. Another way to do that so that, excuse me, you could edit it is I could take her layer, for example, and I can come back under layer and I could turn it into a smart object, convert a smart object. So she's a smart object. And now as I come back up to filter and I go to render and I select lighting effects again, okay, and let's just say this is what I want. I'm going to go ahead and brighten this up a bit. And let's say this is what I was going for. And I say, okay. No, it's not what I want, but you get the idea. And then when you come back here, well, this is a smart object. I can turn off the filter, but I would still make a copy of your layer first before you do this. Okie doke. Let's see. Any other? Any other? Anybody in the chat room to look at? No. Okay, then we're about done for today. Okay, so we've been able to, extend this a little bit, but we're still under an hour. So what I'm going to do then is everybody is welcome to take off. So I'm going to say goodbye, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause my recording, and this will be available for everybody in a little bit, maybe in an hour or so. It will be both in my playlist on YouTube, and it will be on, what is it? Canvas, in both places. Okie doke. So I'm going to pause the recording, say goodbye. You guys are welcome to leave. And say goodbye for now. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk more on Monday. Bye-bye.